In this next session, we're going to explore what we can learn from expert digital creators, expert designers, and software engineers to help us create meaningful learning content and experiences, both for professional, social, and life skills. Joining me now, please welcome Celia Hodent, who is a game user experience strategist and cognitive psychology expert. Celia is an expert on the topic of game user experience and ethics and inclusion. And Celia, you have more than 10 years experience working with gaming studios, including Ubisoft, LucasArts, and Epic's games where you worked on Fortnite. You're also the author of The Gamer's Brain. You're French, Celia, but you're joining us today from California. Welcome.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Bonjour.
It's great to have you with us. We also have Beau Lotto. Beau, there, I can see you are the CEO and founder of the Lab of Misfits. You're American, joining us from the UK. I believe we have a very international panel this afternoon. You're a neuroscientist and an expert in perception and the way we interpret and see things. You're the author of Deviate, the science of seeing things differently, and the founder of the world's first neurodesign studio, the Lab of Misfits, which is part lab, part creative studio that takes a disruptive approach to research and partners with brands to blend science, art, and performance to explore principles in current culture. And finally, Charlie Moreno-Romero, you are the head of studies at Suvemäe-TKG. Charlie, I believe you're Colombian-born. You've studied in Italy and Spain and many other countries, and now you're based in Estonia, where you're the head of studies at the democratic-based education branch, where you're working with students, teachers, and education designers. And we're going to be hearing from three fantastic panelists from around the globe about what you have to say about what you and your students are experiencing online. Let me just set the scene for everyone watching quickly. Now, YouTube and online videos are the first place that most people go to when they want to learn how to do something. Millions, if not billions, of videos in almost every language on earth are there for when we want to learn a language, a skill, understand history, or even just know how to fix something that we just broke. But platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and others have added to the massive content available and augmented the number of content creators. And then the algorithms help us discover more and more tutorials and the how-tos. Even teachers today are on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Their migration to these platforms has been boosted by COVID and online schooling. And then, of course, we have MOOCs from world-renowned universities such as MIT, Stanford, Oxford. This have enabled millions of people around the world to access courses from some of the world's best teachers and professors that they would have never had access to. And finally, we also have serious games that are being used more and more in education and business to help learners adapt, train, and pick up new skills. But we know that not all content, games, and learning experiences are created equally. They're not designed and built equally. We've all stopped watching a video because partway through we found it hard to follow the explications, or maybe the quality is just poor. And not all content is created or distributed with the same intentions. Content and experiences can shift our perceptions and our understanding as individuals and as a society. So it's important to be aware of what we're consuming. And if we're building content and learning experiences, it's important to think about how we go about creating them, which is why we have these three great panelists with us here now. I want to ask, we're going to get straight into the subject, and what are some of the best practices for creating meaningful learning and content experiences? Celia, you've got a huge amount of experience in this field. Do you want to tell us what you think are some of the best practices that we need to consider when we're creating experiences and learning content?
Sure, I can try. Well, I'm going to start by saying that making good games is actually very hard. A lot of people want to try, and even just commercial games are just here to be fun and entertaining. Having a hard time being successful. It's very difficult, so you have to be to really think about what you want to provide, and you have to have like what I call the UX mindset. So UX, as for user experience, is thinking as you develop the game, thinking about the people who are going to play the game, your users, and really have an iterative cycle so that at every step of the development, you stop and think about what you're doing. Is it really serving your players, and are you accomplishing your goals? It's in and by itself, it's already a huge task to do. It takes a lot of time. It requires a lot of testing along the way to make sure that the game is providing good usability. Can people understand what to do, and is it fun? But on top of that, if you need your game to have some social impact or educational impact, you also need to make sure that this is really happening. It's not because you make players manipulate certain things that is truly going to be educational, truly going to lead to behavioral change. So this is adding another layer of complexity. We need to care about what we call transfer. So the transfer of a skill that you learn in one situation onto a different situation. And this is like extremely hard to do. We don't have a lot of examples of games that actually do that well. But nonetheless, there's a lot of games that are interesting in terms of how they foster cooperation or social behavior, or we have a few games that you have games that try to make you understand depression, like Sea of Solitude. You have games that try to make children manage anxiety, like Mind Light is using like a biofeedback electrode on the forehead of children to read their brain waves, and as they breathe, they have to control the light in the game so that they can see the monsters, and it's helping with anxiety. So we have examples of games that are really interesting and that fostering some abilities and fostering cooperation. But we have to keep in mind that it's actually very hard to do, and you have to think about it very early on and think about what type of game can foster that. And maybe it's not even a game that can be interesting. I'll let Beau talk about his work, but it's just keep in mind that it's not easy. And it takes a lot of effort to accomplish this.
Certainly, I think many of us, when we're playing games or seeing content, we maybe don't appreciate how all the work and energy that's gone into making it a good experience. Beau, I want to turn to you and ask for you, what are some of the best practices for creating meaningful learning experiences? And you create experience experiments, I believe, also. Do you want to tell us some of the best practices that you've picked up from your field and work?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for the invitation to come here, and it's lovely being on a panel with such lovely people. So let's see. I'm a little bit lunatic fringe on this because actually I think the brain is embodied, and so we actually make most of our meaning by physically interacting with the world, not with digital experiences. So one really key point then is how can we make our digital experiences somehow taking advantage of the fact that what your brain really needs is interaction. And then, so as Celia said, the importance of feedback, the importance of iteration loops, because Celia also mentioned the point of understanding. So one of the things that's very important for your brain is that through gaming or through any kind of context experience, if you can layer in ability not to know something, but to understand something. Because when your brain gets a sense of understanding, you actually get an intrinsic reward inside your brain, because understanding means you can actually understand a principle that's generalizable. Whereas knowing something is very specific to the context, understanding transcends context. So having content that facilitates people to understand is really, really important. But then it's also the process by which they get there. So for instance, with Celia's games and others, it's through the iteration that you actually discover. So I have a view that as soon as you tell something to someone, you've taken it away from them. So if they can actually discover it, then your brain also encodes that differently. So if you can discover understanding, that's even better. And that's why Celia says it's really, really hard to make a good piece of content, much less a game that's trying to anticipate all different types of interaction, because the other element is your brain loves complexity, not simplicity. Right? A child's story is like, that's the baddie and that's the goodie, and it's so clear and obvious. But we actually want some layer of complexity to our characters or to the narrative, etc. So having the right kind of complexity is very difficult, because you have to give some knowing, some clarity, but also some discovery. That means some ambiguity. But creating the right kind of ambiguity is not easy.
Celia,
so yeah.
No, I love the fact that both you yourself and Celia, and because of your background and your training, you're coming at this from how do we actually learn? How do our brains work? That's exactly what we want to be thinking about, because many people think that, sort of learning has to be fun, but it's not just about the fun and the entertainment. What differentiates entertainment from learning? The gaming into a serious game as such. Celia, you mentioned just a few minutes ago about the transferability of skills. I think this is something that you've worked on quite a bit. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about this?
I personally did not work as much on this as other people, but this is really the most important thing when we think about education, or when you think about behavioral change. What we want is whatever people learn in a situation, they can transfer it in another situation. One of the best practices that we've seen so far, and it's going to bounce back on what Beau was saying, is the work that it's like decades ago from Seymour Papert. He's a constructionist, and the idea of constructionism is that you learn best by constructing your own knowledge, by manipulating things so that create something that is meaningful to you, or solve a problem that is important to you. And so that bounces back of what Beau was saying, that you learn the best by discovering and interacting and just like creating your own knowledge. So these are things that we've known for a long time, but applying it is really difficult. Because, for example, if you use computers to make people do something or just instruct them into something, this is not going to create the spark that you need, the interaction that you need. It's all about creating having an environment where this can be fostered and sparked. And so, for example, it would be making the children or the adults manipulate something so that they can create what they care about. And it's more about leaving all the ingredients there and guiding subtly the learner so that we can create this magic. And that's why some games that are what we call a sandbox, and they are very systemic. So games like Minecraft, Fortnite, in some like lower level, where you can just like manipulate things and take something from one context and reuse it to make something else. Like I remember seeing a player like using a rocket that is a weapon, but he jumped on it so that he could just traverse the map very quickly. That's the sort of things that we want to help players do. But again, it's very difficult to really create.
I love this idea that you mentioned of just sort of like leaving all the ingredients there for players and learners to discover. And so they learn, as Beau said, they learn themselves. Charlie, you are front-facing as such. You're there with the students. You're there with the teachers on a daily basis. What are they saying about the content and the experiences that they're finding online, maybe on YouTube or on Reels? What are they saying about this? And are they finding what they need?
It's a really interesting question. What is it that learners need? We still believe in and betting on an educational system that was built 300 years ago, separating kids by age, organizing their days according to disciplines with the strong authority of an adult. Now, the question is, how can we foster all the soft skills that we're speaking about? Creativity, initiative, divergent thinking. I do believe that, I also play video games and I like them, some of them. But I'm still not convinced about gamification. I believe that we have gone through a trend in which certain contents are gamified believing that this is what people need, what young people will need. And basically what we are expecting as young people, follow a set of steps in order to develop certain skills, which we believe are important and will be important. Now, I work from a perspective of self-determination theory. In self-determination theory, the learner is not somebody who is supposed to be gaining certain knowledge decided by others, but it's a person who takes control over the learning. So within this theory, which is applied in multiple different environments, we aim at developing 3 different kinds of possibility dimensions. One of them is autonomy, the other one is competence, and the third one has to do with relationships. And this is truly important. Whenever there isn't a close relationship with the people who are around, the learners, we are hindering, we are not allowing this possibility of really getting deep into learning. I feel that we need more mentors, tutors, in order to help young people also to explore. I believe in the value of boredom. I am convinced of that, the fact that we are going through a dopamine epidemics. Our kids are getting these devices and they're just jumping into thousands of games, which are really interesting though. And some of them are very useful. But at the same time, our kids, our young people, sometimes are unable to be bored. I think that many of us speak about, when I was a child, I used to get bored and play with bricks. I feel that getting bored has 2 dimensions. One is the boredom that we enjoyed at school, which is shut up and do as I tell you. The other one is nobody's telling me what to do, but I have access to a multiplicity of resources and I can play with those. I have seen kids age 7, 6, just sitting in front of the computer, in front of Scratch, and starting to find out, what is this? Oh, look, when I do this, then I can manage to do this. And they start building the relationship with their peers, relationship with adults. They are autonomous, and they start building on this competence that we are looking for. I don't believe that the contents need to be designed, pre-designed, in order to accomplish a certain curriculum designed by the state or by a higher educational authority. I believe that we need to provide more spaces for kids to explore, to be able to manipulate, to live the experience, as Beau was saying. And at the same time, to start asking at some point how to solve the challenges that we are having as a society. So yeah, I'm a bit critical, but at the same time, I see the possibilities. I have played with kids. It's a great way to get in touch with them. Awesome conversations about, one of my favorite games, Far Cry. But at the same time, I feel that there is some kind of desensibilization in regards to what actually happens around the world.
Mm-hmm. Charlie, what you were just saying there is you talk to kids, you talk to your students, and you're getting input from them, but you're also getting feedback from them. We're talking about how are the best ways how can we create meaningful content? How can we create great learning experiences? And of course, feedback loops are super important when we're trying to create content and experiences. I want to ask our experts here now, Beau, Celia, I'm going to come to you. How do we create great feedback loops? How do we do this well? Celia, you've had quite a bit of experience, I imagine, using this. You've got anything that you'd like to share with us here as to how to do this?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's, I'm going to try to be short, but it's actually pretty difficult. So when we work on user experience, there are 2 main pillars that we look into. One is called usability, making sure that people understand what to do with the game. And the other one is engageability. That's what I call it. And we care about self-determination theory, just like Charlie was talking about. So we look into these things, but feedback is very important. So certain games, we have what we call signs and feedback. Signs are all the things that just by looking and hearing and manipulating the game, can you understand what you can do with it, what are the interactions that you can do with it. And then once you press a button, there's a feedback coming from the game. So feedback can be the animation of your character, it could be something in the interface or a sound effect or a visual effect. Signs and feedback are extremely important just to explain how the game works. So we do a lot of work around this to make them clear and try to reach what we call affordance or form follows function. So just by looking, for example, if you look at Bowser, which is like a very iconic enemy in Mario, it's like the enemy with spikes on its back. In Mario, you usually jump on enemies to kill them, but this one has spikes on its back. So just by looking at it, you can anticipate that maybe this is not a good idea to try to jump on it to kill it. In fact, you're gonna get hurt. So it's stuff like this that we work on, and it's really important. And anytime that something's going on in the game, especially when it's a game that has a lot of depth, we want to have clear feedback so that players can understand what's going on. And it doesn't matter if players fail. And this is also one of the things that are really interesting in games. You can fail in games, but what matters is, can people understand why they failed? And as they try again, can they get better? And this is relating to what Celia was saying in self-determination theory, what we call competence. Competence is being able, if you put effort into it, can you feel your progression? And so when we work on games, sorry, I was trying to be very short, but it's hard to explain that. It's very complicated. We really want to help players progress. And so, yes, they're going to die, then it's going to fail. That's okay, as long as when they come back, they understand why they failed, and then they're going to try again and progress.
Thank you. And I know that's a tough topic to ask you, Celia. You could probably write a book on it. But thank you so much for giving that precise and you did indeed write a book on it, the game's brain. So, but thank you for giving us that input, because feedback and those learning loops and enabling, as you say, people to die or to fail, but to understand why and come back and try again is super important. I'm going to ask the same question to Beau, actually, because you've got some experience here. I believe also, any tips or best practices, how you work with and use feedback in order to create the best learning experiences and content?
Well, of course, it's a very good question. I'm not going to be as knowledgeable as Celia, but what I would say is that your brain, everything in your brain is relative. Your brain did not evolve to see absolutes, it evolved to see relationships. So without feedback, your brain has no way of knowing that it even exists, quite apart from whether it has value in that existence. So the importance of that feedback is essential. And then as Celia was saying, that the feedback needs to be non-random, right? If you don't understand, if you can't make progress because of that feedback, then you're actually going to create stress and anxiety in the person, because there's no way of anticipating what's going to happen next. So, but if it's too explicit in some sense, then you also lose the concept of a game, because you lose the concept of discovery. So anyway, the feedback is essential. Having it be non-random, having it be leading people to understanding is really important. And also creating a context. This is the power of play itself. So we're talking about gaming, but I would extend that to the power of play is that if you're asking someone to learn, you're asking them to actually not know something. And your brain hates not knowing. So often when we're in a position of not knowing, we go to panic, we go to stress. Almost everything we do in our life is an attempt to decrease uncertainty, right? Is to know. There's only really one context in which we love not knowing, and that is play. And that then is the power of the game, is the power of play. And we argue that actually science is nothing other than play with intention, right? And so what you really want is to have those feedbacks that give you an intrinsic reward rather than an extrinsic reward. The reason is because intrinsic rewards, they're very motivating, but much more than that, they're durational. So that motivation lasts longer. If I give you an extrinsic reward, I will motivate you, but as soon as I eliminate that extrinsic reward, I've taken away your motivation to do it. So if you can also get feedbacks that increase your intrinsic reward, that's also very good. But anyway, so again, getting people to engage and play in order to learn is why play is essential, why games are important, because that's actually the brain state where your brain is willing to say, I don't know, but I like to create. And then play by itself has no intention. So if you had intention to play, you have science. That's where discovery comes in. So a game is in some sense play with intention. It's not just play, because play by itself has no intention.
Beau, I'm going to come back to you in just a second about sort of changing our perceptions and how we can play and learn. But we're talking about feedback right now. And there's one thing I was talking to someone earlier today. And in fact, I even heard this in one of the Happiness at School videos that was in our playlist over the lunch break. It's that it's also about getting feedback from all the different user groups that may be experiencing your game or your content or your video out there as well. So Charlie, I think this is something that you've mentioned as well, sort of getting feedback from the teachers, from the students. Is that something that you think is important when you're out there creating learning content and learning experiences?
Absolutely. And during the last 2 years at least, we have engaged in a really interesting process with young people, and is that they build either educational material through YouTube, perhaps, or through podcasting, but also games. And it is fascinating to see how they are giving feedback to each other, because oftentimes they don't have this opportunity in conventional schools. At the same time, we are not only empowering those who are producing, but we are empowering those who are giving the feedback. We are engaging actively in, what Bob was saying, in giving feedback, not because I will get something in exchange for that, but actually it's part of the experience itself of engaging with that, working with my peers. And I feel that this is something that we need to focus a bit more on, which is how to design the gaming experience in a way, giving feedback as part of the gaming experience, in a way that we are promoting cooperation rather than competition, in which there are no losers, but there are winners, in which people can also decide what would be their own reward, what they would get. So again, I feel that we are getting back to the point in which we need to start erasing these roles, these hierarchies of, for instance, teachers giving feedback as the only ones who can give feedback, but rather start playing together with young people, making them also agents of feedback, just by releasing power, right, within classrooms. I feel that we need to also engage in a discussion of what are the contents, who decides on them.
Certainly, and in fact, we had another panelist who was supposed to be with us here this afternoon, Melissa Bessel, and I know that she designs games working in partnerships with governments, and I know that certainly sort of getting context and input from as many user groups is something she's very passionate about, in ensuring that the content that she creates and the experiences are meaningful for everyone out there. Beau, you're focused very much on sort of people's perceptions and then sort of changing perceptions. You've mentioned something, and maybe you remember this. You mentioned using science as a kind of a Trojan horse for teachers to be able to get in. Do you want to tell us a little bit what it is that you're doing there?
Yeah, so we're creating it's predicated on work we've been doing for many years, which is an education in physical spaces, but we're now putting this on to digital spaces. But the idea is that the way you change perception is by, again, you have to get people to go to the very place they usually evolve to avoid. And the way you get them to go there is through play. And the argument here is that play is, that science is play. So what we're empowering children to do is to actually become the scientist, not learn about science, because a lot of people have a misconception of science. They think science is about coming up with truths or the scientific process. In fact, science is a way of being, and the best scientists embody this way of being. The scientific method is actually the craft of science. And so what we want to do is create a space for children to be able to ask the questions, not say, here's the questions, here's the recipe. We're so often teaching children to be sous chefs, not chefs, right? So to be able to create a space where children can actually want to not know, to ask questions, and then make their own discoveries. And then, as Charlie said, actually to have mentors rather than teachers. And the feedback that you give, coming back to the last question, isn't a correction, it's further questions. The result of this program resulted in the youngest published scientist in the world at 8 to 10 years old, and the youngest ever main stage TED speaker when she joined me on stage once. So that's what we're creating. But the reason for it is because we want people, young people, and everyone really, to have these principles like compassion, curiosity, criticality, commitment. We call them the C's. And coming back to an earlier question, that's how you enable children to generalize. That's how you enable anyone to generalize, by giving them principles that transcend context, as opposed to just simple knowledge that's specific to that context. Because curiosity applies everywhere, but you can learn it within, for instance, the context of science as a Trojan horse for that curiosity, or the Trojan horse for courage. But then you also need to guide them in how to then, and that's where the mentor comes in, how you then generalize the principles that they discovered, often unconsciously, into new domains.
Okay, so we've had some great feedback and information, tips, perspective from you all. And it's fantastic to have three such diverse experts here on the panel. But what I want us to also think about are some of the challenges and the important points that we need to consider and to take into account when we're creating learning content and serious games together. Celia, I know that you're also focused on ethics and safety. So what do we need to think about when we're bringing kids together online for learning together, or even bringing adults online for learning together? What are some of the important points?
Sure. Just like anything, we have to be careful about who our children are playing with, and what's the situation here. If it's an environment that you entirely control and you use like a game and you play with kids and you do experiments, it's all fine. Now, if you use an environment that is commercial, and you want to play or let your children play on a certain platform, you have to be careful about what's going on there, making sure that you know who your kids are playing with, because there's always some harassment that can be possible. Like the latest ADL report is not really good. It's showing that a lot of kids and adults are experiencing harassment and unwanted behaviors online. And so this is a reality that we need to be mindful of. And we also need to be careful of, when there's, again, it's all commercial games. Their games are fun and they're made to be fun, but we also need to be careful about their monetization model, and how do they earn money. And because there's sometimes what we call dark patterns can be used. It's ways we can like deceive players to make them buy something that they don't really need, or they can the use of more like shady practices, like forcing people to come back on a specific moment, otherwise they're gonna miss something really amazing. This is what we call the fear of missing out. And so there's a lot of practices like this that are not really great. They're all around the economic model of certain games. So we have to be careful about this. This is the main limitation, again, for commercial games. Just make sure that what is your child playing, what mode is it playing, or is she playing, because there's a lot of different modes on the same game. Who are they playing with, and just like be there to monitor that, and how what is the economic model of the game, so that you can make sure that there's nothing too shady there that's putting pressure on children to buy stuff who come back. So that's the main limitation for commercial games. And then for the other games, just like I was saying earlier, and it's not it's not easy to foster certain abilities and to encourage transfer of these abilities onto another context.
No, but certainly we want to be aware of all the great things that we can do to create this content, but also aware of some of the things we need to be cautious of and look out for. So thank you for highlighting some of those. Charlie, for yourself, challenges or important points, not necessarily the negative, but the good things also that we need to take into consideration when we're creating learning content and learning experiences. What do you think we need to include in there?
Okay, let me first highlight a little bit where I'm talking from. I'm in Estonia, 1.3 million people. You can pay taxes in 5 minutes on your phone in this country. Actually, the internet access was considered a human right in 2001, one of the first countries. 99% of the public services are online available. From the year 2000, 29% of the people had access to the internet. 2016, 91% of the people. Most of the e-learning solutions were available already before COVID. However, there was this challenge, which is that young people, and there are this is in the Estonia Human Development Report 2020. Most of the young people are using the internet or e-solutions or the digital experience to find information, for entertainment, for communication, but there is very little social engagement. I feel that we're still preaching about democracy, preaching about citizenship, but we are not actually providing the possibilities for this to happen as an embodied practice, as Beau was saying. I think that we also need to start considering about ICT underlying conditions, the environmental crisis and exploitative labor. As Celia was mentioning, people's mental health, young people's mental health. I feel that we need to work, and we could work more on media literacy, and especially on participatory skills, how to train adults to be facilitators of media literacy. I believe this is a must, something that perhaps content designers and producers could start considering. Now, the possibilities are huge. Besides adult engagement, I feel that we need to also support parents on how to manage functional limits when using devices, when using games. We need to promote more cooperation over competition. We need to focus on the educational commons, how young people can get together, co-design, co-create, co-design, co-evaluate learning experiences, also within digital environments. And finally, how to promote autonomy, competence, and relationships beyond consumerism, beyond just a kid as a consumer. I feel that there are tons of possibilities. We need to start collaborating more, civil society and producers, developers.
Certainly, I love your perspective on this, Charlie, because we can create the best digital online learning content and experiences, but we also need to train and help teachers, students and learners to use them and to use them really well. Media literacy, as you mentioned there, sort of the collaboration. We've already talked about feedback, but also sort of how do they come together and create relationships with other users, as you mentioned about society and democracy. How can we do that through these online games and platforms? And we need to also sort of skill up people to be able to do that through media literacy and digital literacy. I see a hand going up from Charlie. You want to add something? Go for it.
Just to add something that actually is tremendously important to engage parents. I feel that the game should not only be for young people, families getting together, enjoying, also designing together these functional limits is a crucial part of what we need to start considering from now on.
I'll raise my hand for that as well, because I agree that sort of gaming and collaboration are great ways of creating relationships and keeping and fostering and nurturing those relationships going forwards as well. We've got just 6 minutes left here, and with this great panel of speakers, visionaries that you have, all of your experience, but all of your future vision, I want you to turn on those future goggles that you have. And I want to ask you what you believe are going to be the drivers for the next generation of digital content, digital learning experiences that are going to impact learning and impact our society. Who wants to go first? Ladies first, Celia. I'll put you in the hot seat.
Okay, it's always hard to tell, but what I've certainly seen trending in the game industry and in video games in general is that people are not just players; they're becoming makers. We see that, and there's a lot of creative modes, whether it is on Minecraft, in Fortnite, or we see that in Roblox, where kids are creating their own games. And it's developing worlds. We talk a lot about the metaverse recently, but it's interesting to see how people are not just consumers and they can actively take part into creating this new space where we're gonna play, but also do other stuff, just hang out, dance together, watch movies, and just build stuff. So that to me is really exciting because hopefully if we can get there and it can be decentralized and people can really be owners of what they're making, it can be really interesting because then we can foster this scientific mindset, and we say in child development that old children are born scientists, and so we just need to encourage that, and hopefully this is what we can be able to do and encourage and play and encourage experimentation and be curious.
Fantastic. I love that experimentation, curiosity, play. I've maybe something similar or different from Beau. What are your perspectives? What do you believe is going to be the driver for the next generation of digital content? Something that's going to impact learning and society?
Everything Celia just said. And I might just add that and it's also a fundamental principle for making anything that's of quality, which is you imagine the future where, and Celia was actually speaking to this, that you make it relevant and you make them part of it. These are two fundamental attributes of any sort of interaction. And wouldn't it be wonderful we could actually make new discoveries as a consequence and put people into that discoveries of self, discovery of the world. And then that's such a powerful feedback. But also to create spaces where you can foster true relationships, okay, where it's truly social. Our brain evolved to be social. To not be social is not an option, right? The problem is so much of what's out there are proxies for social. Facebook is not a social experience. It's a bit like, you know, McDonald's provides foods and they key on the sugar and the salts and the fats, and it doesn't provide nutrition, but it satisfies those needs. These are proxies for something. Facebook does the same thing. Facebook's like the McDonald's of social. Could we actually create spaces where people are actually fostering deeper social relationships that are meaningful, because there's a possibility of then having deep relationships with people that are diverse. And in that, you increase compassion, decrease intolerance, and finding those shared principles and creating spaces for that discovery and trusted spaces, which Celia and Charlie are talking to about the dangers of some spaces if they're not trusted. Yep. So that's what I would like.
Fostering compassion, fostering that curiosity. These are all things that we've been talking about throughout the day here in this, what we call the planetism mindset. Also, Charlie, last but not least, over to yourself. What do you believe, based on your perspectives, what you're hearing from your students, your teachers, what are going to be the drivers for the next generation of digital content that are going to impact, change, revolutionize our learning and society?
Yeah, I'm really happy and honored to be in this inspiring panel with inspiring people. I feel that definitely we need to engage more the users, young people. But at the same time, we need to start joining somehow the virtual and the actual. It's not about virtual and real. The virtual experiences are real for users, for gamers, but rather how to link them in meaningful ways. Still, I believe that we have way too much dopamine. I believe that we have way too much sedentarism. Kids are not moving enough. Perhaps the future involves something that combines these two worlds, the actual and the virtual, in which kids can solve something inside of the game and then go out to the real world, to the actual world, and also engage with other people, with other players in this. I remember this Pokemon game that was fascinating because kids finally were moving around the city, were recognizing their cities, just looking for some Pokemon. But at the same time, they were moving, they were exercising. That was great. I feel that is something, and we need to start paying more attention to how to reconcile these two areas, which seem to be at war. Well, I think that definitely we need to equip young people with the tools to explore that curiosity they are born with. So thank you, Celia. Thank you, Beau, for this inspiring work that you are doing. And thank you, Kristen, for getting us here together.
Thank you to Charlie. Thank you to Celia. Thank you to Beau. It's been absolutely fabulous having with you here on LPTV at the Learning Planet Festival. Thank you so much to you.